winter of 1978, Oakhaven was hit by a frost that turned the ground into iron. Most contractors folded their tents and waited for spring. Victor, 30 years old and still tasting the salt of the Atlantic on his breath from the boat ride over, stayed on the site. He used kerosene heaters to thaw the earth and spent 36 hours straight hand-taping insulation around a fresh foundation. He had arrived in America with a suitcase held together by twine and a set of heavy-duty trowels. He didn't come for the American dream of white picket fences. He came for the American concrete. He saw a city that was growing upward and decided he would be the one to hold it up. 44 years later, Vasiliev Construction was the regional titan. Victor's hands were a living ledger of that growth. His knuckles were swollen, his skin etched with the gray pallor of Portland cement that no soap could ever truly wash away. He was a man of the earth, but he was living in an age of the cloud. His son, Andre, was the prince of the pivot. At 42, Andre didn't have a single scar on his hands. He had an MBA from a school that taught disruption as a religion. To Andre, a crane wasn't a tool, it was a depreciating asset. To Victor, a crane was a limb. For 18 months, a quiet rot had been spreading through the company's executive floor. Victor felt it before he saw it, the way a master builder feels a shift in a load-bearing wall before the cracks appear. Andre had hired a new consulting strategist, Camille, who eventually became his wife. Together, they were a surgical team. They began by streamlining the middle management. They fired the men who had been with Victor since the first warehouse pour, men who knew where the pipes were buried and which foreman could be trusted in a crisis. They replaced them with efficiency experts who wore slim-fit suits and spoke in a dialect of jargon that Victor found intentionally alienating. "Dad, you're thinking about the next building," Andre would say during their increasingly tense Monday morning briefings. "I'm thinking about the next century. We're going to be a prop-tech giant. We're going to be the Uber of urban development." "Uber doesn't own the cars, Andre," Victor would rumble. "If we don't own the trucks, we don't own the job. Ownership is a liability, Victor," Camille would chime in, her voice like a polished blade. "Agility is the new capital." Victor watched as they rebranded the headquarters. They stripped the oak panels he loved, the ones that smelled of cigar smoke and old blueprints, and replaced them with smart glass and brushed titanium. They were trying to make the building look like it had no history. They were trying to make him look like he had no place in it. The betrayal wasn't a single event, it was 1,000 small signatures. 6 months ago, Victor noticed a discrepancy in the fleet logs. 3 of their newest Liebherr mobile cranes, multi-million-dollar assets, had been moved to a subsidiary called Vasiliev Apex Holdings. Victor hadn't authorized the move. He checked the digital signatures. They were Andre's. Victor didn't confront him. He had spent 40 years playing the long game with city councils and unions. He knew how to wait. He hired an old friend, a private investigator and retired auditor named Saul, to dig into the Apex subsidiary. Saul met him in a basement bar 2 weeks before the thank-you dinner. He slid a folder across the sticky table. "It's worse than you think, Vic," Saul said. "Andre and Camille aren't just optimizing, they're stripping. They've taken out a massive mezzanine loan against the company's core assets, the yards, the equipment, even the patents on the modular housing system you invented. They're using the cash to fund a Vasiliev digital startup that is 100% owned by them, not the parent company. Once they get you to sign the final succession papers, they're going to declare the construction wing insolvent, sell the assets to pay off the loan they took from themselves, and walk away with a debt-free tech company. They're killing the goose to buy a golden egg," Victor whispered. "No," Saul corrected. "They're killing the goose and letting you take the blame for the bankruptcy while they move to the penthouse." Victor felt a coldness in his chest that reminded him of that 1978 frost. He looked at his hands. They were shaking, not with age, but with a terrifying, focused rage. "Can they do it? If you sign the papers at that dinner, yes. Once you hand over majority voting control, you're a passenger on a bus driven by 2 people who want to crash it for the insurance money." Victor spent the next 14 nights in Saul's basement. They didn't just look for a way to stop the sale, they looked for a way to enact a structural reckoning. Victor remembered a clause his own father, a man who had fled the Soviet collapse, had made him put in the original 1980 bylaws. It was a poison pill for the bloodline, a fail-safe designed to protect the work from the ego of the heir. The night of the dinner arrived with a heavy, gray sky that threatened snow. The top floor of the Vasiliev building glowed like a beacon of blue light against the dark Oakhaven skyline. Andre and Camille had spared no expense. The thank-you dinner was designed as a softening ceremony. They wanted Victor to feel tired, honored, and ready for the grave. As Victor stepped out of the elevator, he was greeted by a young security guard who didn't recognize him. "Guest pass, sir. The name is on the wall, boy," Victor said, his voice a low vibration that seemed to rattle the glass partitions. Andre appeared looking like a shark in a charcoal suit. Dad, you made it. Come in, come in. Camille has been perfecting the menu for weeks, a celebration of everything you've built. The room was a cathedral of ego. They had set the table in Victor's old office. The mahogany desk was gone, replaced by a marble slab that felt like a morgue table. Throughout the meal, oysters, wagyu beef, truffled potatoes, they showered him with tributes. They had a slideshow playing on a loop. Victor in his 30s, Victor at the bridge opening, Victor shaking hands with the mayor. It was a funeral for a living man. You've been the pillar, Victor, Camille said, raising a glass of 1982 Bordeaux. But even the strongest pillar needs to be reinforced by a new structure. We want to take the weight off your shoulders. We want you to see the world while you're still healthy. I like the view from here, Victor said, his eyes fixed on Andre. Andre leaned in, his face glowing with a synthetic warmth. We know you do, but the board is getting restless, Dad. They see the tech companies growing 400% while we grow 4%. They want agile leadership. If you sign the transition papers tonight, we can present it as your idea, a legacy gift to the next generation. It keeps the press quiet, it keeps the stock stable. He produced the folder. A midnight blue leather binder that felt like a coffin lid. Everything is ready, Dad, one signature, and you're the most respected founder emeritus in the country. You've earned the rest. Victor looked at the folder. He saw the gold-plated pen Andre was sliding toward him. He looked at Camille, who was watching him with the clinical intensity of a scientist observing a specimen under a microscope. They thought he was a relic. They thought because he had concrete in his lungs, he had cobwebs in his head. Let me read it, Victor said. Victor opened the midnight blue binder. The paper was so thick it felt like fabric, the kind of material used for treaties or surrender documents. He didn't reach for the gold pen Andre had offered. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his own, a battered plastic Bic pen with the cap chewed on, the same kind he used to mark up blueprints on windy scaffolds. You skipped the preamble, Dad, Andre said, a nervous edge creeping into his voice. The first 10 pages are just the honors and privileges section. It details your travel budget and the new housing allowance in Florida. I don't care about Florida, Andre, Victor said, his eyes scanning the definition of terms section. I care about clause 8.2. Camille shifted in her seat. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed. Clause 8.2 is just a standard asset reallocation provision, Victor. It allows the managing director to liquidate underperforming divisions to ensure the long-term solvency of the parent company. Underperforming, Victor looked up. You mean the heavy equipment yard, the fleet of 50 Liebherr cranes. The very machines that are currently building the 4th Street Bridge. The bridge is a low-margin project, Dad, Andre snapped. We're pivoting to asset-light management. We don't need to own the cranes, we lease them back. It frees up $300 million in liquidity for the Vasiliev digital expansion. Liquidity, Victor whispered the word as if it were a curse. You want to turn a company built on steel and stone into a company built on water. You want to sell the tools to pay for the office. Victor flipped to the final page. The signature line was waiting for him. It looked like a trapdoor. He looked at his son, really looked at him. He saw the impatience, the greed, and a terrifying lack of respect for the 40 years of sweat that had paid for Andre's charcoal suit. You think I'm a relic, Victor said. It wasn't a question. We think you're a legend, Victor, Camille said, her hand moving toward the folder. But even legends need to know when the story ends. The story doesn't end, Victor said, closing the binder with a sharp thud that made the wine glasses ring. It just changes perspectives. Victor didn't sign. Instead, he reached into his battered briefcase, the one Andre had tried to replace with a leather satchel, and pulled out a simple manila folder. It was stained with coffee and looked humble, almost pathetic, next to the midnight blue binder. What is this? Andre asked, his voice thin. This, Victor said, is the Vasiliev Limited Partnership, VLP, restructuring agreement. I had it drafted 6 months ago by a firm that doesn't use strategy in their name. They just use the law. He slid the manila folder across the marble. You were so busy rebranding the top floor, Andre, that you forgot to check the original 1980 Articles of Incorporation. My father, your grandfather, was a man who survived 3 different government collapses. He taught me that the person who owns the land is king, but the person who holds the golden share is God. Camille snatched the folder. Her eyes darted across the pages, her face turning a sickly shade of gray. This is an illegal encumbrance. You can't transfer voting rights to a third-party trust without a board vote. Check page 12, Camille, Victor said, leaning back. The founder's prerogative. In the event of a suspected hostile internal transition, the founder retains the right to trigger an immediate audit and move all Class A shares into a protective trust managed by the Succession Committee. And who is the Succession Committee? Andre asked, his hands trembling. Not you, Victor said, your sister Alina and Miller, the site foreman, and Saul, the auditor you thought was too old to matter. They are the new board, and as of 6 p.m. tonight, 2 hours ago, they voted to freeze all asset reallocations. The cranes aren't being sold, Andre. And the Vasiliev digital project, it's been defunded. The silence in the room was absolute. The summit suite no longer felt like a cockpit, it felt like a cage. Andre stood up, his face contorted with a mixture of rage and disbelief. You've ruined us, we have contracts, we have investors waiting for the digital launch. You're destroying the future of this family for a bunch of old men in hard hats. I'm saving the family from a thief, Victor said, his voice rising for the first time. You didn't want a legacy, Andre, you wanted a heist. You wanted to strip the skin off this company and sell it for parts while I was still breathing. We were going to be billionaires, Camille screamed, the mask of elegance finally falling away to reveal the hunger beneath. You were going to be ghosts, Victor countered. You would have sold everything, and in 5 years the name Vasiliev wouldn't mean a bridge or a building. It would mean a broken app and 1,000 unemployed workers. Victor stood up. He felt the strength of the concrete foundations he had poured 40 years ago rising up through the floor, into his boots and into his spine. You're fired, Andre, both of you, effective immediately. Your access to the building ends at midnight. Your executive expense accounts have been closed. If you want to stay in this family, you'll start on Monday morning at the 4th Street site. You'll be reporting to Miller. You'll be wearing a hard hat and you'll be learning how to mix mud. I'll sue you, Andre hissed. I'll take everything. With what money? Victor asked. The VLP owns the house you live in. It owns the cars you drive. It even owns that suit you're wearing. It's all company assets, Andre, and the company has decided you're an underperforming division. The next morning, the sun rose over Oakhaven, painting the skyline in hues of bruised purple and gold. Victor Vasiliev sat in his old truck, parked across the street from the 4th Street Bridge project. The site was alive with the sound of diesel engines and the rhythmic clack-clack-clack of rebar being tied. At exactly 7 a.m., a sleek German sedan pulled up to the gate. Andre stepped out. He looked exhausted. He was wearing a brand-new pair of work boots and a yellow hard hat that sat awkwardly on his head. Miller, the foreman, walked over to him. He didn't offer a handshake. He offered a shovel. You're late, kid, Miller said. The footer for the South Pier needs to be cleared. Get digging. Victor watched from the truck. He took a sip of bitter black coffee from a thermos and felt the weight in his chest finally lift. He hadn't just saved his company. He was giving his son the only gift that mattered, the chance to actually earn something. He put the truck in gear and drove away, heading toward the next site. There was a lot of work to do, and for the first time in a generation, the foundation of the Vasiliev empire was perfectly, unshakably level. The week following the dinner was not quiet. Andre and Camille did not go into the mud without a fight. By Tuesday, Victor's desk, now moved back to its original oak glory, was piled high with cease and desist orders. Andre had hired a high-priced firm from the capital, a group of lawyers who specialized in elder abuse and shareholder oppression. They filed a motion for an emergency injunction, claiming Victor was suffering from early-onset dementia and that the golden share restructuring was a product of undue influence by the union foreman. Victor didn't flinch. He spent his mornings on the construction sites and his afternoons in a windowless room with Saul and Alina. They're going for the jugular, Dad, Alina said, her eyes tired but sharp. She had flown in from Seattle and immediately stepped into the chaos. They're claiming you don't have the mental capacity to manage the trust. They want a court-appointed conservator. Let them come, Victor said. On Thursday, the hearing took place in a sterile courtroom. Andre sat at the petitioner's table, refusing to look at his father. Camille sat beside him, her pen moving frantically over a legal pad. Their lead attorney stood and gave a sprawling 90-minute presentation on Victor's erratic behavior, citing his refusal to sell the equipment yards as evidence of regressive cognitive decline. When it was Victor's turn to speak, he didn't let his lawyer do the talking. He walked to the stand himself. He didn't carry a folder. He carried a single, worn ledger from 1980. The counsel says I am living in the past, Victor began, his voice echoing with the authority of a man who had built the very courthouse they were sitting in. He says that wanting to keep my machines is a sign of a failing mind. But he doesn't mention the $3 million in consulting fees my son moved to an offshore account in the Caymans last July. He doesn't mention the forged safety inspections on the West End project. Victor opened the ledger. I am not an old man clinging to a shovel. I am a builder who knows when a structure is being sabotaged. I didn't create the trust because I was confused. I created it because I was awake. He then presented the court with a video file, a recording from the thank you dinner's own security system, audio included. The court listened to Camille's voice whispering about liquidating the soul of the company and Andre's cold admission that they were killing the goose. The judge's ruling was swift. The injunction was denied. The golden share was upheld. And most devastatingly for Andre, a criminal referral was made regarding the offshore accounts. 1 month later, the dust had finally settled. Camille had fled to Europe, taking what remained of her private jewelry and a small, untraceable bank account. Andre, however, had nowhere to go. The Vasiliev digital dream was a crater of debt. He found himself standing at the edge of the 4th Street Bridge project. He was thinner now, his expensive charcoal suit replaced by a canvas jacket and jeans. His hands, once soft and manicured, were beginning to blister. Victor walked up beside him. They both looked out over the river, where the massive piers of the bridge were rising out of the water like the ribs of a giant. "The concrete is set," Andre said. It was the first time he had spoken to his father without a script in years. "It's a good pour," Victor replied. "No bubbles, no cracks." "I hated you for that night," Andre admitted. "I thought you were just being a stubborn old man who couldn't let go of the steering wheel." "I wasn't holding the wheel to keep you from driving, Andre. I was holding it to keep you from driving off a cliff. You wanted to be a billionaire in a year. It takes 40 years to build a name that can survive a storm." Victor reached out and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. The grip was firm, the same grip that had guided Andre as a toddler. "Elena is doing well with the books," Victor said. "She's found a way to modernize the logistics without selling the cranes. She wants to know if you're ready to move up from the shovel to the site supervisory role." Andre looked at the bridge, then at his father's scarred, cement-stained hands. He looked at his own hands, raw, dirty, and finally beginning to feel the weight of the work. "I'm not ready yet," Andre said quietly. "I still haven't finished clearing the footer for the south wall." Victor smiled. It was the first real smile he had felt in a decade. Good. A man who won't leave a job half-finished is a man who can eventually be trusted with a legacy. Victor Vasiliev retired for real on his 73rd birthday. There was no Summit Suite dinner this time. There were no oysters or deconstructed foams. Instead, there was a folding table set up in the middle of the equipment yard, covered in pizzas and crates of beer. Every man and woman in a hard hat was there. Miller gave the toast. Elena sat at her father's right hand, and Andre sat among the foremen, his skin tanned by the sun, his eyes finally clear of the hollow ambition that had nearly destroyed him. Victor looked up at the red brick building he had owned for so long. It no longer looked like a stranger. The smart glass had been replaced with clear, honest windows. The Arctic cedar scent diffusers had been thrown in the trash, and the air once again smelled of diesel, sawdust, and sweat. He had lost a partner in his son, but he had gained a man. He had lost the modern version of his company, but he had saved the soul of his empire. As the sun dipped below the Oakhaven skyline, Victor closed his eyes. He could hear the echoes of the city, not as ghosts of the past, but as the heartbeat of a future he had protected. The concrete was poured, the steel was set, the foundation held.